There are moments in life that split everything into before and after. The morning HOA Karen knocked on my door was one of those moments. Not because of what she said, but because of what was happening inside my house, while she stood there with her clipboard, her sunglasses, and absolutely zero conscience. My grandmother was in the next room, oxygen machine running, eyes closed, fighting the hardest battle of her life. And Karen? Karen wanted to talk about my gutters. This story didn't start with cancer. It started with a moving truck. The day I moved into Maplewood Estates, I had no idea that the woman standing across the street, arms crossed, eyes scanning my furniture like a customs officer, would eventually become the most exhausting person in my entire life. Her name wasn't Karen, but you'll understand why I call her that. She was the HOA president, self-appointed guardian of every lawn, every mailbox, every inch of paint on every door in our neighborhood. She had a notebook. She had a schedule. And from the moment my moving truck pulled in, she had a problem with me.
I smilte her.
She looked away. I waved. She wrote something in her notebook. I brought over cookies during the holidays. She left them outside her door with a note that said, "Please review HOA guidelines on solicitation." Cookies. She reported cookies. I told myself, new neighborhood, new rules, give it time. Some people just need warming up. I was wrong. Within my first 3 months, I received 7 violation notices.
7.
My welcome mat was non-compliant. My wind chimes were acoustically disruptive. My potted plants were placed outside the designated decorative zone, a zone that existed only in Karen's personal interpretation of the bylaws. I read those bylaws. Every single page. Most of her complaints had no legal basis whatsoever. But here's the thing about people like Karen, they don't need a legal basis. They need power. And in a small neighborhood HOA, that clipboard is power. I pushed back politely, responded to every notice in writing, documented everything. And every time I successfully defended myself, I could see it, the way her jaw tightened. The way she'd find something new to complain about within days. It wasn't about the rules.
It was about me.
I just didn't know how far she was willing to take it. 8 months after I moved in, my grandmother came to live with me. She was 79 years old, retired schoolteacher, the kind of woman who remembered every student's name, who hummed while she cooked, who could light up a room just by walking into it. She also had stage 3 breast cancer. She'd been living alone after my grandfather passed, insisting she was fine. But after her last scan, the one where doctors used words like aggressive and spreading, we all agreed. She couldn't be alone anymore. So she came to me. I converted my living room into her space. Hospital bed, oxygen machine, medication schedule on the fridge, nurse visits 3 times a week. My whole life reorganized itself around her comfort, her dignity, her peace. For a few weeks, even Karen seemed to back off. Maybe she had some humanity buried somewhere, I thought. I was wrong again. It started small. A notice about my driveway. Then my trash bins being 2 inches outside the pickup zone. Then a formal complaint, submitted to the full HOA board, claiming that the medical equipment being delivered to my house was causing neighborhood disruption. Medical equipment. For a cancer patient. I went to that board meeting. I explained, calmly, clearly, that my grandmother was undergoing cancer treatment. That the deliveries they found disruptive were oxygen tanks and 4 supplies. That I was asking for basic human understanding. 3 board members nodded sympathetically. Karen took notes and said, "The guidelines apply to all residents equally." I went home that night and sat next to my grandmother's bed for a long time. She was asleep. Her breathing was slow, assisted. Her hands, the same hands that used to hold mine when I was small, looked smaller than I remembered. I didn't tell her about the meeting. She had enough to fight. For months later, her oncologist called me into his office alone. That's never a good sign. The cancer had spread. Significantly. He used the phrase quality of remaining time. I drove home in complete silence, walked inside, sat on the kitchen floor, and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a child. My grandmother called out from her room. She always knew. Come sit with me. I wiped my face, fixed my expression, and went to sit beside her like everything was fine. She held my hand and said, I know. I've known for a while. And I need you to be okay. That was my grandmother, dying and still trying to protect me. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Medication changes, pain management, hospice consultations. I took leave from work. I barely slept. Every morning my first thought was the same. Is she still breathing? And then came the morning that changed everything.
It was a Tuesday.
My grandmother had just had her worst night yet. The hospice nurse left at 6 a.m. after stabilizing her. I had finally fallen asleep on the couch, still in my clothes, her hand in mine. At 9:13 a.m., the doorbell rang. I ignored it. It rang again.
And again.
I opened the door. There she was.
Karen.
Clipboard in hand.
Hoa vet.
Sunglasses pushed up on her head like she was about to inspect a pool, not ruin a human being's morning. She looked past me into the house, just for a second, and then looked back at her clipboard. I'm here to conduct the quarterly home inspection. I'll need access to the exterior perimeter, the driveway, and your gutter system. I stood there. I could hear the oxygen machine from the living room. I could hear my grandmother breathing. And I looked at this woman who had made the last year of my life a nightmare, standing at my door on the worst morning I had ever lived. And I had a choice to make. I want you to freeze that image in your mind.
Me.
Front door. Clothes from yesterday.
Eyes swollen.
Behind me, an oxygen machine, a hospital bed, and my grandmother taking some of the last breaths she would ever take in this world. And in front of me, Karen.
Clipboard. Pen.
The faint smell of her morning coffee, still on her breath. I said one sentence. My grandmother is dying. Please come back another time. Karen clicked her pen. This inspection was scheduled 14 days ago. It won't take long. It won't take long. My grandmother.
Dying.
In the next room. And the concern was how long it would take. I stepped aside. I let her in. Not because I was weak, but because some part of me still believed that if a human being saw another human being suffering, they would stop. I was wrong. Karen walked in like she was inspecting an empty property. She made notes about a scuff on the baseboard. She cited the medical equipment for blocking an egress pathway. She stood 3 feet from my grandmother's hospital bed and wrote notes about my baseboards. And my grandmother opened her eyes. She looked at Karen, then at me. And in that quiet, exhausted way only the very wise can communicate, she understood everything without a single word. Who is this? Karen didn't look up from her clipboard. Nobody, Nanny. Go back to sleep. That was the moment something shifted inside me permanently. Not anger, I was past anger. This was something colder, quieter. The kind of feeling that doesn't burn out because it isn't fire. It's stone. Karen left a notice on my kitchen counter. 3 violations: the scuff mark, equipment placement, and the gutters. Gutters she hadn't even physically checked. Cited from a street photo taken 2 weeks earlier. 30 days to remedy these or fines will begin accruing. I stood holding that notice. Behind me I could hear my grandmother asking for water. I put it face down on the counter and went to get her a glass. That was a Thursday. My grandmother passed away the following Sunday morning. I was holding her hand. The oxygen machine had been turned off. The room was quiet in a way rooms only get when something enormous and irreversible has just happened. I sat with her in that silence for a long time, thinking about her hands braiding my hair, the song she hummed in the kitchen, the nickname only she ever used for me, the one nobody else even knew. And then I stopped grieving for a moment, and I opened a folder. 14 months of violation notices. Every email, every meeting minute, every photograph. I added the Thursday inspection notice on top, and I contacted a lawyer. What followed I won't detail fully. But here's what mattered. Karen had conducted that inspection illegally. The bylaw required 48 hours certified mail notice, not a community board post. She had selectively enforced violations against me while her own property violations went unaddressed for over a year. Discriminatory enforcement. Fully actionable. 3 neighbors came forward. I wasn't the first she had targeted. I was just the first who kept receipts. Karen was removed as HOA president, named in a civil complaint. The settlement is confidential, but that Thursday notice was the last HOA correspondence I ever received. The gutters were fine. They had always been fine. I still live in this house. Karen moved away 8 months ago. Last spring I planted flowers in the front yard. Big ones. Bright ones. The kind my grandmother would have stopped to touch on her morning walks. No permits required. Nobody measured them. Nobody complained. Some mornings I sit on my porch with my coffee, made the way she taught me, the recipe I finally wrote down before it was too late, and I look at those flowers. She told me to be okay. I'm working on it, Grandma. I'm working on it.